Welcome to Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage.
Howdy, and welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam.
And I'm Liam.
And this is a podcast where we talk about the music that stands the test of time. Happy episode 6. We made it to October. We're very excited. I'm going to see Weird Al Yankovic in concert for the third time in my life tomorrow.
It's amazing.
I saw him as a teenager. I saw him when he did the orchestra tour a few years ago with my brother, and now we're going again. He's doing the tour. It's kind of an interesting tour. He's not doing any of his parody work. He's doing like all of his original stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's like... I don't know if there's a specific reason for that other than just he wants to, or if it's a way to save money. I don't know. Like it's just kind of a unique thing that he's doing. And so, you know, I've already seen him twice before, so I don't have any negative feelings about that at all. I'm actually really excited about it. Also, I'm doubly excited because Emo Phillips is opening, and I've never seen Emo before. So I'm excited about that. He's incredible.
That's awesome. I wonder, I mean, I bet you that you will hear like some deeper cuts than on this Weird Al tour because it's stripped back from all that other stuff.
Right.
That's amazing.
And like you were talking about with like the Rage concert that you went to, I've purposefully not looked up like set lists from other shows, like what he's been playing, because I'm excited about the surprise aspect. So
yeah,
and it's at the Moody Theater, which is the best sounding room that I've ever experienced in my life. So
right,
I saw Radiohead there like 12 years ago. It was incredible. 11 years ago, whenever it was that they did Austin City Limits. So I'm stoked. I'm very happy.
I'm blanking. What's your Weird Al album? We obviously did a whole episode on Weird Al, but what, like, if you had your album, like the one that did it for you, or you started listening to him, like is there a song on the album that is your album where you're like, I hope he plays that song?
I honestly think it's probably going to be Frank's 2000-inch TV. Off of Alapalooza.
Okay. Alapalooza.
I feel like I could go any number of directions with whatever my Weird Al album is, because I came in at a certain point and like, obviously, I loved the Even Worse album and the Nevermind parody. I can never remember the name of the album.
Off the Deep
End. Yes.
Yeah.
But then Alapalooza, that was just like, you know, coming of age. Jurassic Park was enormous. I got it on CD as opposed to on tape. So that's kind of like, okay, that's probably the one I've listened to the most.
All right.
No, what is Frank's 2000-inch TV off of? Now you got me like...
I'm just thinking like, because mine is right after that. Mine's Bad Hair Day, and then Running with Scissors too. Like back to back, those two are huge for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, like, if I heard The Night Santa Went Crazy or Albuquerque, I would lose it, dude. Oh, my God. If he played Albuquerque, right?
Dan's coming with me, and if he plays Albuquerque, Dan is going to have a conniption, and it's going to be amazing.
I feel like it's so funny because it's along age lines. Like, you're just a little bit older than me, and it's so, like, that exact age that you get into Weird Al when you're in our space.
Exactly.
Of like, it just hits at the right time. I think it's almost predictable that would be
completely.
Dan's thing, for sure.
Yeah. I would venture to say Running with Scissors is Dan's. But I was right. Frank's 2000 inch TV is on Alapalooza. So, so that would be my like, my pie in the sky wish list for the deep cut. That he might go into.
I'll say one thing, because I did just look at set list stuff. I'm not going to give anything away, I promise.
Okay.
Don't get worried.
I'm getting nervous.
I'm not seeing consistency. So it's all over the place. That's all I'm saying. So even if you did look at this thing, which I don't think you should, I totally agree with you. It's a good call. I do the same thing, but he's not playing the
same stuff every night.
I'm not seeing a whole lot of consistency here. So you have no idea what you're in for.
Okay,
tomorrow,
great.
Which is so freaking cool.
I love it.
That's awesome.
I love it.
Now I wonder if he will make an exception though and do Amish Paradise.
See, I was thinking about that.
Right, because we lost Coolio and
legend.
Yeah,
gone.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah. Which we'll talk about a little bit here, I think. Just, to kind of celebrate his legacy and his impact a bit. But before we get into that, we're here to talk about Steve Albini today.
Yes.
It's very exciting. Legendary producer. Obviously, we did a while back. It seems like it must have been a year ago now that we did the Butch Vig episode. Maybe even longer.
I think it was more than a year ago. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is so crazy to think. Yeah.
It's so weird to imagine that we started, in the early part of last year. It doesn't feel real, because we're getting close to the end of this year. So we're in October now. So we're going to talk about Steve Albini. One of my favorite producers, and also, a member of a band that I adored growing up and still do, produce some of my favorite records from some of my favorite artists. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to go down that rabbit hole. And I've had it in the back of my mind kind of ever since we started doing this. But yeah, we definitely need to talk about Coolio. Before we do that, what's been going on with you lately?
Went to another concert. I got to see the Gaslight Anthem, which is just, if you have a band, that's probably it for me. There's a ton of bands I love that mean a lot to me, but Brian Fallon and that whole crew it's like ever since I heard that 59 sound back in the day, must have been, I guess that was 2009, but it was like this stomach churning moment where I'm like, this is it. Like you find your connection, and it blooms inside of you. Oh my God. And so he split off and he did his solo stuff, and they're doing a reunion tour.
Nice.
And it was great. And I'd never been to this venue that they were playing. It was on a pier in Manhattan. So they're like set outside against a bridge. I think it was the Brooklyn Bridge. So they're playing in front of the Brooklyn Bridge, and you've got the city skyline to your left, and it's comfortable out because
really
it's
cool.
September in New England, right? And so it's all good. So yeah, it was a great time. Played
awesome,
and I had that moment, and again, like we were talking about with Weird Al. Although my wife swears that I've seen him play this song before, but I don't know about that, or I don't know where I was mentally. But like, somebody held up a sign at the show that said it had like lights, like glowing lights on it, like electrical lights.
Oh man, they went all out.
They did, and it said Blue Dahlia on it. Now, Blue Dahlia is, if you bought the deluxe version of their fourth album, it was like a B-side that was added on.
Oh, deep cut.
It was, and like I always ask because it's such a good song, and I'm sure you can relate to this, where you're just like, why wasn't that on the freaking album?
Right,
it's so good. And I asked him that at one point, like years ago, and he was like, yeah, it's a great song. It just didn't fit with what we were trying to, like, it didn't gel with the thing, but we didn't want to lose it. Right, and it's become this like fan favorite thing. But I don't think I've ever heard them play it, and it's probably my favorite. If not, it's like top 3, but it's probably my favorite song by this band.
Man.
And dude, when I tell you, and I'm an excitable person. You've seen it happen. Like I get smiley and winky and squinty and giggly, and like when he said, well, "All right, you made this cool sign. Yeah, we'll play that song," and they rip into the first chord, I freaked out, dude. I grabbed my wife and I'm like, I can't believe this is happening.
Oh my god!
Yeah,
what a great moment!
It was magical, dude. Like to have that experience of like, this thing is happening in real time.
Right.
I feel like I don't get that as much anymore. Like it's still exciting to see live music, obviously, and music can always be exciting. We do this podcast. Like I love talking about music and listening to music, but like to have that like in my blood, visceral moment of just pure joy and fandom. Like
absolutely.
It was this buzz. It was so great. So
that's amazing. It might be a good
artist plays that song, right? Yeah,
exactly right. Yeah. That might be a good topic for an expand your mind, because you talk about Gaslight Anthem and I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's just not a band that I ever really like. I know of them only because of you. Like, so.
It's a very Northeast thing. Like they have their little pockets here or there, but it's very Jersey, Long Island. Like they resonate there for sure.
Yeah, and I guess I left the Northeast in like 2002. So
yeah, and they were after that. It was like 06, 07 is when they came around.
I missed it.
So yeah, that's what it was.
All right, cool. So we have the unfortunate task of talking about another legend that has left this plane of existence. Rest in peace to Coolio.
Yeah. I got the text about it like while I was at the Gaslight Anthem show.
Oh, wow.
Actually, yeah. Like I was standing there, and for my work, like we have to stay on top of that stuff a bit.
Right.
Like if something happens, I'm always, got it in the back of my head. Like if it's in my kind of wheelhouse, then I kind of have to drop everything in a news sense and go into that framework, you know? And so when I saw this, I texted my teammate in the hip hop space and I was like, look, this is going down. And she had to make a bunch of phone calls and stuff. But yeah, no, it's always sad when you hear this kind of stuff. And he's such an interesting artist, because like that era of the 90s where hip hop became mainstream in a commercial way, the authenticity of those artists and what they had experienced, you can't really understate it. Like when you think of NWA, like those guys lived that stuff. And I'm not saying that the hip hop artists now don't, but like there has been generations since of some sort of affluence or opportunity even to do things where maybe your lifestyle is rough, but like, I mean, Coolio joined the Baby Crips when he was 11, like he lived on the streets before hip hop was even like a viable thing. He was in a gang seeing people get murdered in high school, like in his school, in the school bathroom, seeing, like in Compton. So yeah, I guess my point is like, yeah, there's this window of time where you had these quote unquote pop stars. He was a pop star, right? Like it's a massive
turned
song,
out that way. Yeah.
Right?
Huge.
Yeah. But like a pop star who had this crazy rough background of somebody who had been through absolute hell.
Yeah.
And then got thrown into a machine. Like, I don't know what else you can expect in a situation like that. It's a difficult thing to go through for sure, and to have that success is always going to come with drug possibilities and a lot of money and a lot of people around you and stuff. So,
and nobody to tell you no. No, at that point, it's like, and he even talks about it there. Because I've been in such a Weird Al headspace the past few days leading up to the concert. And then with Coolio's passing, of course, there's a lot of crosstalk about Weird Al, and there's this quotation from Coolio where an interviewer asks him about what happened there. People are always want me to ask, like, did you really say no to Weird Al? Like, are you guys cool now? Like, what's the deal? And he talks about how he admits that he was wrong. And he he doesn't put on like a tough guy act or anything like that. He's literally like, that was dumb of me. And I wish that at that point in my life and my team around me, that somebody had told me not to do that, not to, make this statement that it was disrespectful and everything. Because he says a couple years later, I listened to the song and I was like, okay, that's actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
And he also talks about how, this is the guy that parodied Michael Jackson and like huge artists. And it's like an honor almost to be parodied by Weird Al. So it was just really cool to see him, especially like you talked about with the, the tough upbringing that he had to just, come out and just be completely vulnerable like that and say, look, I was wrong about that. And I wish that somebody had told me no.
Yeah. The weird thing that always struck me about that contention, right, is that he himself went through a very similar thing with that song to preface its creation, because the song is Pastime Paradise by Stevie Wonder. If you go and listen to that, like, it's the song. It's just the song. He obviously tweaks it, and then all of the lyrics and the subject matter and the heart, it completely transforms it into a new song.
Right.
But Stevie didn't allow him to do that initially. Like, when he proposed it to Stevie at first to do Gangster's Paradise, Stevie Wonder declined it because he was like, it's riddled with profanity. And so when you go back to the end result, Coolio went and cleaned it up so that he could get Stevie's approval. And then have Weird Al's interpretation of Pastime Paradise
right.
have the same kind of like barriers or red tape or something to it is interesting. But as you're saying, like, the subject matter of Gangster's Paradise is exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
Right. It's this commentary on, like, this is a waste, guys. Like, the lifestyle that I was in, it's just a waste of life. It's a waste of time. It's futile. It's sad. It's depressing. It's awful, and it shouldn't exist. And so I can see why then, like, he's making a commentary. It's a very personal record, and then somebody wants to turn it into, like, use it as a joke. But he did the same thing to what Stevie Wonder's, like, that wasn't what Stevie Wonder's song was about. So he reinterpreted it, and somebody reinterpreted that.
Right. And I think too, he probably eventually realized what a lot of other artists do, is that if Weird Al parodies your song, it's bringing attention to the song. Like, it's going to boost your visibility as an artist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't think Weird Al has done anything disrespectful in his entire life, at least professionally, in his public life. So, it's kind of a badge of honor, especially just with such a long career. But I don't know if
we
you
got
want
to mention Keenan and Kel. We got to.
Yes. Yes.
And I feel like Nickelodeon music, I want to do an episode about Nickelodeon music at some point, just because it's such an important thing for me growing up. But I remember when Keenan and Kel was being created, and there were like these teaser trailers, and there was like this little interview segment with Keenan and Kel, and they were like, Coolio's got to do the theme song. And I'm sure it was almost like a commercial. Like who knows what actually went on behind the scenes. But
I wouldn't put it past them though.
Yeah,
it's got to be true.
Yeah, they were like, yeah, the producers came to us and said, who do you want to do the theme song? And we were like, Coolio. And man, he was like in the theme song. Like,
yeah, he's in the intro to the show.
He's like sitting on the couch with them and playing with them and stuff. And like, it's weird because, so all that, were you like a Nickelodeon kid in that sense, or not so much?
But like that was like I was just barely like getting too old for Nickelodeon, quote unquote.
Got it. Yeah.
At the time that like all that, and I was of the era of Snick, Doug, Ren and Stimpy, Rocko's Modern Life, you know what I mean, stuff like that. So that was a little bit like, I was just getting into these.
Yeah, I got a Rocko's Modern Life shirt.
Oh, and look, there's is that Hey Arnold behind you?
I do have a Hey Arnold plush behind me. Yeah, no, I'm a Nickelodeon kid, man. I grew up in that generation, so yeah,
love it.
But so there's a thing, not to go too deep into this, but all that was SNL for kids, right? Like
basically,
that was the premise, and so all that. The theme song was done by TLC, which I didn't even know who TLC was, right? But like, that was a cool song. Like, I liked that song. And they would have performances on the show, not every episode, but sometimes. And you had Aaliyah. I remember the Brat, Maya 112. Like, they were repping hip hop and R&B at that time to a really white kid in the suburbs. It was like amazing.
Yeah, that's their key demographic, is the white suburban kids.
Like white suburban kids being exposed to this hip hop that I didn't even know I was being exposed to.
Very cool.
So I remember when Keenan and Kel got their spin-off show and they were just like, man, it's got to be Coolio. I was like, dude, Coolio's awesome. Like, it's like Keaton and Kel like Coolio. I mean, I gotta like Coolio too then.
Totally.
So I like that. It was a great theme song. It was super fun. It's a bummer to see the ultimate trajectory. I mean, he had a reality show. He did some Big Brother stuff. He relapsed with drugs. He had some run-ins with the law. It's rough, like you don't know what's going to come out of working in this industry, but he also he was like super engaged with environmentalism and education. Like, he did a lot of good. He used his fame for good in a lot of senses, and he also I feel like he was pretty humble. Like, he definitely did a lot of cameo work. He would pop up on TV shows as himself a bunch, It wasn't like Ice Cube, like, are we there yet stuff. Like, he was just like, yeah, I'm Coolio. I'm here. Like, he's on Futurama and stuff. He would bubble up in these places, and he was like this cultural icon that everybody kind of remembered as like, yeah, that was a good dude. I like that guy. And he like really made a powerful statement back in the day. So rest in peace, Coolio, man. Like,
rest in peace, Coolio.
Yeah. Big impact here.
Man.
All right. So we're going to be talking Steve Albini, right?
Yes.
Okay. So some people listening to this will know who that is. Some people just know the name. Some people won't know at all, maybe. But they probably are familiar without knowing it. I wanted to point out, obviously we mentioned we did the invigorating Butch Vig episode ages ago at this point.
I moved away from puns in the titles. I've outgrown that a little bit.
I liked it. I thought it was a good pun.
It was a good episode though.
Yeah.
But
that one, we obviously talked about his very polished approach to. He is a producer that you can tell when you're listening to a Butch Vig
polished
album, and it's something, admittedly, that I love. Like, that's something that tends to speak to me when I look through his Butch Vig's catalog of what he's worked on. It's hit after hit after hit for me. he did Nevermind, right? And on the heels of that, it dovetails nicely into the fact that Steve Albini would then be the band's choice for their final, their follow-up album after Nevermind, In Utero. So kind of complements a past Retro Groove episode, and also kind of complements our last episode about CBGBs, because as we're talking both about the splintered kind of art rock, hard rock, punk rock, all those different things that came out of that CBGB scene, the impact that it had, and I'll argue that it's also just the Hilly Crystal way and demeanor and perspective made its way to Montana,
Right.
Yeah. To impact this person. So it almost is too fitting to go from talking about how Hilly Crystal viewed and fostered artists and what CBGBs was able to do, and then to say, and then in the next episode, here's a really great example of something that came out of that, which is Steve Albini in Montana.
Absolutely. And so what we're referencing here is, so Steve Albini, as a kid, was born in California, but eventually they moved to Montana and he grew up there. As a teenager on a school field trip, was introduced to the debut album of the Ramones by a friend, changed his life. Just
obsessed. He became obsessed. He just listened to it over and over again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it completely changed the trajectory of what he wanted to do with his life. He buys all the Ramones albums up to that point. Just wants more than anything to be in a band. And it was just the abrasiveness of the sound is what struck a chord with him, and no pun intended, and really launched his love of that kind of raw, abrasive music for the rest of his life up to today. And so, if you know anything about Steve Albini's own music, it is very abrasive. Yeah. But, and also another part of this story is the story of the birth of punk music in Chicago. So, he graduates from high school, begins his college career at NU, and actually for journalism, but doesn't ever end up being a professional journalist, because while he's in college, he begins, and even a bit while he was in high school, begins playing in bands, creating his own music, giving out his tapes to anybody in Chicago who would, and he just wants more than he doesn't want to be a journalist anymore. He wants to be in a band.
Yeah. And he's a very detail oriented person.
Yes.
And he's digging through these records as he's kind of figuring out that this is a scene that speaks to him, and he's looking through the credits. Like he's compulsively listening to the Ramones, and then he's looking at the names of the engineers and the producers and the people that they're thanking, and then he's finding those at his local record store, secondhand store, and he's kind of beautiful minding the scene, because there's no internet. Right? Like there's no scene in Montana. So right. he can go to Chicago, and he's already walking in there with this semi-comprehensive understanding that he's put together of who these punk bands are. He's done the deep dive, and he's got this attention to detail that has, like, he's 10 steps ahead of everybody else in that sense. Like he already has walked in there and knows so much about what he's going to try to do here.
Right. Super smart guy, just like a walking encyclopedia. You hear him talk about anything, whether it's, microphones or a particular band or particular manufacturing process or poker. And it's just like, he's just a wealth of knowledge. It's just all up there. But yeah, he, around 1981, starts getting into, recording bands and recording his own projects. And, that kind of begins his producing career. But before that really gets, underway, he meets the members of the Chicago punk band Naked Ray Gun, which, if it's not obvious, is a direct play on the Sex Pistols. Yeah. Naked Ray Gun, Sex Pistols. Pistols, yeah. They're basically they're like the early punk band in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Ends up spending time with them. And ultimately, two of the members of Naked Ray Gun join his project, Big Black. Yeah. Extremely abrasive music, both sonically and lyrically. Mm-hmm. Just gets very explicit and almost like just egregiously offensive with the subject matter of the lyrics in the Big Black songs. But it's more so than just like being young and stupid. It's more of a commentary on and a middle finger to the corporate rock world, just and even, society at large, which is kind of the ethos of punk at its very core, or one of them.
It's a constant attempt in every way, and it's sincere and genuine to not be commodifiable.
Right.
Like, he doesn't want to create something that somebody could package up and sell very easily, and that doesn't interest him as a fan either. He doesn't want to listen to that, and he doesn't want to necessarily make that. But he also does have an appreciation for the various visions of other artists and whatnot, right?
Right, absolutely.
His vision, as he's embodying it in Big Black, he will not. They did. It was completely DIY, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? Like,
no contracts.
They did everything themselves.
Refused to sign any kind of contracts. They booked their own tours, did or paid for their own recording. They just did it all themselves, and that solidified his just philosophy on the way that things should be from there on out, even up to this day, still refuses to, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but does a recording engineering job, gets paid for the job, and that's it. Doesn't try to take royalties on the recording or anything like that. It's just, all right, I did the job. Mm-hmm. That's it. I got paid for my work, and that's it. I recorded you guys.
Got a paycheck, right.
So, and then, in contrast to, as we were talking about Butch Vig and his production style, very polished and sparkly and dreamy sounding, Butch is a pop producer. No matter who he's recording, which is why Nevermind is a pop record. And coming back to the Nirvana In Utero transition from Nevermind to In Utero a little bit, and then we can get back to the timeline here. Kurt didn't feel like Nevermind sounded like Nirvana. It was like this wasn't the way that we wanted our record to sound.
Right. The label was really jazzed about it.
Yeah,
Radio
absolutely.
was really jazzed about it. And if you think about who we were when we were listening to Nirvana at that time, like, Nevermind sounded very different from everything at that point. It was a paradigm shift. But like you're saying, to that band, they were like, no, it's supposed to be even more like this, and it's supposed to be more dynamic, right? There's supposed to be this like power pop mixed with the abrasive rock, and it wasn't captured there. It was all like polished and not homogenized. That's unfair, but like it didn't encapsulate what they were looking to do.
Right? Yeah. Kurt never, and probably never would have allowed it to become homogenized, but
Right.
you know, they were such an abrasive band, and Butch's production work, I don't know if I would go so far as to say softened it up, but you know, sanded off the rough edges, cleaned it up, and made it a lot more palatable. And that's not what Kurt wanted. It's no secret, and we're not, you know, breaking any barriers or anything here by saying that Kurt was very uncomfortable with his level of fame.
Yeah.
Not what he had intended, to
Right.
say the least. And so with In Utero, he wanted to make a record that sounded the way that he had always wanted Nirvana to sound. And Steve's philosophy, for lack of a better word, when it comes to recording a record, is he wants to make the record sound the way that your ears would hear the sound of the band playing in front of you. And that's not the way that most producers do things, especially not in the, you know, pop music and corporate rock world. Has to sound pretty. And he also seemed to take great joy in recording bands that just had a very abrasive sound with rough edges and a punk aspect to it anyway. So, and you can hear it in the Pixies records too. They sound Surfer Rosa to, you know, almost any of their other records sounds very different.
Yeah. Well, so you have Big Black wrapping up, splitting up, breaking up in 87, I think it was, right? And right around that time, you have the Pixies had their EP come out, and they're working towards a full-length album. The label 4AD revisits the producer that they had worked with before. I think it was Gary Smith. And, you know, he had done the initial EP at minimal cost to the band as like a test and just working it out and starting a relationship or whatever. But when it finally came to like, let's do the deal, let's make a full album together.
Yep.
He wanted to be paid properly for it. He wanted to get the rate that someone normally would get in that position, and the royalties and the kind of cuts and proper billing and whatnot. And the label balked, and the band, it seems, also felt very uncomfortable with like their first album being with somebody who was going to be making these asks of them. And so apparently there's this employee that was working in the label warehouse in 4AD. I mean, they're still around. They're part of the Beggars Group. They've an iconic indie label, but we're small, even smaller at that time than they ever were.
Yeah.
And someone in the warehouse made a suggestion to the co-founder who was like sorting this out at the label to look up Steve. Just like threw the name out there and said, you know, this guy's not going to ask you for a bunch of money. He's not going to insert himself in with the band or anything. And he really knows his stuff, you know, like he's, he's the guy. And so Steve goes and they reach out to him. Price tag seems good to them.
Do you remember what it was?
I don't. No.
Steve Albini's producer fee on that album was $1,500 flat, no royalties, just
nothing
that's
on
it.
top. Yeah, right.
So
just pay me for the work. Yeah.
So one of the most iconic albums $1,500. That's it. Like Steve probably could have, forget In Utero. He probably could have retired just on Surfer Rosa royalties alone.
Yeah.
And nope, because that's not his thing. It's not what he does. He doesn't want to do that to the artist.
Right. Well, so what he did, and it basically initiates or starts the process and how he's going to function throughout the remainder of his career, is he meets with the band, he gets an idea of what they're trying to do, and they went to the studio the next day and they just knock it out. Like he knows how to set up the mics and like the technical know-how. The guy has read all the manuals. He's figured it all out. He is fascinated with the science of it all, of the acoustics and how everything works. He's spent the time to think up problems so that he can then solve the fake problems that could come about, so that he knows when he's in the situation and something's not sounding the right way. Well, I know that if I switch this over or I adjust this, it will fix that. The guy is meticulous in that. And so the label is then quoted as saying, like, he's the ideal man to hire to work with the band. He tells you exactly how long it's going to take, because he knows, like, you're not going to sit in the studio and just mess around a bunch of times. Like, he's going to have it ready to go and you're going to knock it out, and he doesn't, like, he's moving on then after that, right?
Well, especially for $1,500. Like,
that's
we need
the
to
thing.
get in and out. I need to get on to the next session.
You're like, he needs to pay the bills, so you're hiring me for a week, 2 weeks, whatever. I'm going to deliver for you exactly what you need. You don't have to worry about it at all. I'm going to set it up so that you walk in there and what you want recorded will be recorded in a genuine manner. And it's done. And there's no hidden fees. There's no like
nothing
between
off the
the
top.
lines contracts. Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure they got screwed in plenty of other ways, but it was not on record producing royalties.
Right.
And for my money, the best sounding Pixies record.
Yeah,
it sounds incredible.
So I want to pause here for just a second, and just say, and again, we've said it in the past. I'll echo it here. Like, this sub area of rock, this sub genre, this era, is actually a bit of a point of almost insecurity for me, because I was too young for it. I went back to it and I can appreciate some of it, but it's not my inherent space. When we're going to be talking about the Breeders, even Nirvana, like that era, but the gatekeepy nature of like that scene has always been kind of daunting for me. Like, it always has felt that way, and so it was interesting then to see. There was an interview that Steve Albini had done where he was saying that, like, he loved working with the Pixies. He was just like, yeah, they're all really great, but he was never a Pixies fan. You know, like he's like,
was a job.
Music's good. It was music was good, and he, again, just like Hilly Crystal, was like, they have a vision. I respect them as creative artists who are trying to do something that is wholly unique, and I'm going to help them do the thing that they want to do.
Right.
And I think Kim is the best singer I've ever heard, and they have this unique vision, and so I'm going to do what they need me to do to support their vision. But it's funny, like, he goes to talk about how the music that he produces isn't necessarily the music that he wants to listen to as a fan.
Right.
And it almost comforted me a little bit, because I was like, oh, okay. So, like, I don't have to be, like, fully beholden to all of this. Like, everybody gets to have their opinions and their experiences with music. But it's this, like, pedestal that music gets put on, and rightfully so. I can hear it and I can understand it, and it means a lot to people. And I want to know, like, I want you to tell me about what this Pixies like music means to you. Like, tell me about the Pixies.
Like with anything else, a lot of it is just the time that it first got into you and what you were going through as a person at the time. That has a ton to do with it.
For sure.
And, you know, I got through the Pixies catalog, you know, in retrospect. I wasn't a Pixies fan in 1988. I was 6, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So it was later on, in the mid to late 90s when, you know, Nirvana was huge, and, you know, again, really no internet, and then very, very early internet, in the mid 90s. And so the way that you a lot of times found out about other bands is, you know, looking at the liner notes, looking at, okay, who recorded this album, who recorded that album, what other albums did the label, the interviews where the artists talk about other bands that they were influenced by. And I kept hearing this band Pixies come up, with, you know, Kurt talking about how he was influenced by the Pixies, and, you know, the Breeders had a hit with Cannonball. God, off the top of my head, I can't remember what year that was, but
I think it was pretty close after that. And you're a Breeders fan too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of spawned from there. I found out about the Pixies and their connection to Steve, and that whole, it's just a web, and it's just like pulling on strings and seeing where it leads. And I fell in love with the Pixies, and it just kind of went from there. I couldn't even really necessarily put my finger on what they mean to me so much, but especially at the time, there's something about the dynamic of the group. It's a very give and take kind of polarity that they have. You've got Kim's voice, which is, you know, very soft and kind of broken sounding. And then you've got Frank Black's voice, which is like, you know, he can kind of croon a little bit, but mostly he's just screaming at the top of his lungs.
Yeah.
And then you've got the soft verse, loud chorus thing that they're so famous for, that influenced so many other artists. And I don't know, something about it clicked with me. And I just really, once I picked up my first Pixies record, it was like, that's all I listened to for like a year.
Wow. You kind of Albini'd it.
Kind of. It was just, it became kind of an obsession. Like, I learned how to play the songs on my guitar. I would listen to the bass lines, and kind of, that was one of the first times I remember listening to music. And I don't know if non-musicians do this, but like I would hum or hear or sing like harmony lines to the music that don't actually exist in the song, but like
same.
I've listened to the song so many times that that's like the earliest memory that I have of doing that, is to Pixie songs.
You mean not screaming that in your room and your parents are walking by being like, oh my God, this kid. Like, because I definitely did that. I could blast it and singing my own harmonies, and my dad would be like, all right, you got to chill out, dude.
Yeah. For me, it was usually in the car.
Okay, cool.
Or just humming the harmony with headphones on or whatever. don't need, my mom or dad walking in while I'm screaming along with, I don't know. Don't need that.
You and Kim Deal are doing a duo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Harmonizing to, I don't know, Wave of Mutilation or something. And it's like, I don't want to explain to my mom Wave of Mutilation.
Yeah. It's better than singing along to a Big Black song.
Probably.
Yeah.
And now to bring it back around, I never got into Big Black. I had seen the records in the stores, but I ended up really getting into shellac. So Steve, after Big Black ceases to exist, he first forms a band that I refuse to even say the title of.
Yeah. That's how abrasive he is. We're not even going to say it on this.
Not even going to say it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can look it up if you're that curious.
Go for it.
But it's not safe for work. And then in 92 forms shellac. And instantly recognizable from just, it sounds like he plugs the guitar into a microwave or something. It's just a completely unearthly guitar tone.
And do you think that you found that because you were tapped into that Pixies Breeders scene, like what was happening there? Like, how do you? Because
it was just part of the
Steve
web.
Albini was? Okay, so it was
I
just
still
part of
didn't
that,
really at the time. Like, I had heard the name, but I didn't really get into like the more deeper cuts of, the names of the producers and stuff like that until like 2000 and when I started working at a record store and stuff like that. Okay. It was just like, either a friend recommended it or I happened to be driving around with a friend and they put on an album that I had never heard. And, that was huge back then. That was a lot of how you discovered new music was, through friends. There was no file sharing yet. So mostly it was friends making mixtapes for you. Or I had a friend that ended up being very like-minded that I'm still in touch with to this day. And at one point, you have one, I think still, the massive CD binder where you have hundreds of CDs
it's in my car. Yeah.
It's still in your car.
Yeah.
One day we were just like, we just traded. I was like, here's my heart in we have kind of a special relationship to this day, even though we hardly ever talk anymore. Here's
Things
my heart
on my body
in a
just
binder.
tightened up. Like
exactly.
I just tightened up all over the place.
I gave him my CD binder. He gave me his stuff that I had never heard of before. Stuff like Don Caballero and Morphine and all these amazing bands that I'd never even heard of. And so just stuff like that, stuff that you don't really share music like that anymore. But yeah, that's how I discovered a lot of these bands.
Wow.
And eventually, like, especially once I started working in the record store, you start to see a thread like, wow, Steve Albini's done a lot of cool stuff. Like this guy is on every record that I love. The Breeders' first album is my favorite Pixies album. In Utero, which is my favorite Nirvana album. Like it's just bonkers.
Well, and so you weren't the only one who was a fan, although unknowingly a fan of his work, because as we've mentioned previously, Kurt Cobain and Nirvana as a whole sought out Albini for In Utero because he was a fan, just like you, of the Breeders and Pixies albums. He wanted to create an album that represented Nirvana the way that he felt that those albums represented those artists.
Yeah. And at this point he has at this point purchased his studio, Electric Audio, and he got quite a bit more than $1,500 for his fee. But
and he didn't want to do this. He didn't like he opposed it. He wrote a little op-ed about it not wanting to work with the band to begin with. He called them REM with a fuzz box. Like he didn't because he saw what Nevermind was, and it was in the face of everything that Steve Albini stood for. Right? He looked at this and he was just like, this is a sellout band on a massive label, and it's going to be a ton of garbage swimming around on this thing, and they sold out to commodify this abrasive rock music from the Northwest, and ultimately he gets won over by them. Like they continue to pursue him, and he gets won over because he sees that they're actually this genuine deal. They are the real deal that is just deep in the machine. And he's like, okay, well, I can help with this. I can help you deliver on your vision then, right?
And we're going to do it my way, though.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
We're going to rent a studio in the middle of nowhere with no corporate suits around.
Well, he said, like, you need to pay for this out of your pocket. So it was, what, $100K?
100,000
this time instead of 1,500.
Instead of 1,500. But still no royalties.
No royalties, nothing on beyond that, no thresholds of sales or anything that comes onto that, no points. And so he tells the band, or he suggests to the band, pay for this out of your pocket. Like, you pay me. And then we can keep the label and the manager and all that, just keep them out of it, like as best as we can, because labels can always try to find ways to recoup and claim money. Like, it's always a mess. But they said, he said, pay me and we can keep them out. And they didn't allow any of the management label into the facility at all. They were just like, it was just Albini and the band doing this. Courtney Love apparently shows up at one point, and it's a whole thing. Of course. As is the story of Nirvana. But yeah, like he let the band pick the takes that they liked, right?
Yep.
And Cobain walks away from it, and this is where things get dicey, and it will be something that you continue to hear down the road on this, because Steve is set in his ways, and he does have a way of he's got a moral code and an ethos that he sticks to. So according to some, they walk away very happy. Cobain's quoted saying it's the easiest recording session that they've ever done.
He got the album he wanted.
Right.
Because it sounds like Nirvana sounds.
Which is what Steve is saying that he is being told by the band at that point, right? But things are never that simple. There's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions, and there's also a lot of people who want a lot of money out of this situation.
Of course.
And so
and clout.
Walking out of those sessions with the recordings as they are, the label is very unhappy, and management is very unhappy.
Of course.
They're talking about how, the Nirvana sound that they've captured here and what the Nirvana sound is here is not commercially viable. It's not palatable for radio. And that the whole session should be scrapped. And there's this back and forth. There's a lot of doubt that gets sown, and ultimately, like, the band starts asking to remix the album, and they ask for the master tapes from Steve, and Steve says no. Like, he doesn't want to give them to him. He's like, that wasn't the deal, guys. Like, we agreed we would do this together. We would all agree on this stuff. I don't agree. Like, you guys made the album you wanted to make. I don't know why this is different now. And the story goes that Chris called and they had a conversation, and he eventually relinquishes the tapes. the tapes are given to Scott Litt, and by my understanding, he reworks at least the songs that were serviced as singles, right? Like
that's what I also understand. Yeah.
Yeah. The label needs to make sure that they have something that they can sell off of this album, and they don't need to change the whole thing. And I'm sure there's a million conversations that go on that we'll never know about behind the scenes of like what is staying and isn't staying. But ultimately, like that album is, and I'm interested, I don't know what your history is with In Utero, but that album winds up being this odd mix of what they genuinely made there and then what was altered to be commercially viable. And like maybe that's a compromise, like maybe that's okay. I think Steve probably has some conflicting feelings about it, especially because when you talk about Steve Albini and people sing his praises, like In Utero is the bullet next to Surfer Rosa as like, look, this guy did Surfer Rosa, he did Pod, right, The Breeders, and he did In Utero, and everyone's like, oh my god, that's like 1, 2, 3, like the top of the pops.
Totally.
And so like he probably feels a little conflicted with the fact that like In Utero wasn't released in the way that he recorded it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I've watched so many interviews and read so much the last couple of days. I'm trying to find that specific topic. I don't remember specifically if he addresses, you know, he's just that kind of pragmatic kind of guy where he's just like, you know, I did what I was paid to do, and you know, I moved on to other things. It's like they can do what they want with it. You know what I mean? Also, I actually, in looking up some of the information about In Utero just now, I was wrong on the date. It was 93, so it had not yet been to the point in 95 when Steve purchased his own studio. Otherwise, they probably would have done it there, just as a side note. But the interesting thing is that you can now hear Steve Albini's mix. They, you know, you might know more about the legalities behind certain things, as far as who okays what and who approves what and who has to get paid for this, that, and the other thing. But on the anniversary edition, let me find it here.
Of In Utero?
On the, I think it's on the Super Deluxe. There's so many different versions.
Of course, yeah. I mean, you got a band that had 3 albums and is one of the most iconic bands of the past 30 years. You just got to find new things to package it as. Super Deluxe, you said?
Yeah, because there's like a regular 20th anniversary deluxe version, and then there's the Super Deluxe version.
Right. You get the Snyder cut of In Utero.
You get the Snyder cut.
Yeah.
Where you could, there's so many different tracks on this Super Deluxe.
Oh wow, yeah, look at this. Oh my god. Yeah.
So you do have the Steve Albini mixes that you can hear, and you can kind of A/B it and listen to the differences in the different mixes of the song. So it's interesting. It's not, you know, it's not very common to have that kind of thing happen where people end up clamoring for the original mix of the song. I think you can even get it on vinyl now, but it's probably crazy expensive the way that things are. Yeah.
He but so on the heels of all that, obviously like massively impactful album.
Yep.
And has hits come off of it. It does sustain Nirvana's position. They didn't fall off. And he is vocally critical of it, saying that the record in stores doesn't sound like the record that was made. It's still them singing and playing their songs. The quality of it still comes across, but he's making his statement. He unabashedly feels the way that he feels, and he feels very strongly about his. He's very confident in his abilities to do the thing, and the thing is recording the artist in the way that they want to represent themselves. But because of that, because of being combative and being set in his ways, he becomes very unpopular with major record labels.
Oh, of course.
Like, he could have been the guy who then everybody at Interscope and Sony and whatever went to, and instead he is kind of dismissed as is hard to work with. And again, I don't think he cared that much.
No,
if anything, he probably preferred it. Yeah.
Exactly. That's just who he is.
Yeah, he's like, let me go cry about it in the corner. Like,
exactly.
I already hated you, so I'm glad that you guys are on the same page with me now.
Yeah, exactly. He wants to. And that just comes from his punk roots. He doesn't want to be involved in all that crap. He's gonna do what he feels is right, and he doesn't care what you think. And to a lot of people, that comes across like, he's an ass or something, but he's, just sticking to his personal convictions. And you got to respect him for that. And, for all of the, negativity that the major labels tried to spin about him, he's actually just a really kind person. And there's this story of a young James Murphy of LCD Sound System writes Steve a letter and then is just like, I love all this stuff that you do, like I'm trying to build a studio, like where do I start? And Steve just starts sending him like diagrams and instructions and like all this stuff. And it's blowing James Murphy's mind, because he's just like, I just wrote a letter to like an inspirational figure of mine. And he's like sending me like hand-drawn diagrams of like how to do things properly and how to mic things properly and all this stuff. And it's like, he's overwhelmed by it. And, so he's just, he's that kind of guy that he'll give you the shirt off of his back, but he'll tell you the truth and you're not going to like it at the same time.
Yeah.
Just one of those types.
So then he goes on. I mean, he's ultimately recording hundreds and hundreds of bands at that point. And so I think we flag a few things here or there. I mean, the one right on the heels of In Utero, right around that same time, for me, is Jawbreaker. I again, like, that's one of the places where I actually have my toes in the water a bit. Like, I was and am a huge Jets to Brazil fan. That was my entry point, and then I went back to Jawbreaker, and the rough punk nature of what Jawbreaker was very shocking to me, because I was so used to what Jets to Brazil is.
Yeah, Jets to Brazil doesn't sound punk at all.
No, not at all. But it makes sense now, like, knowing that Albini did 24-hour Revenge Therapy. He's not credited. I should go look on the shelf, but it said that he's not credited in the album's notes. He was named as Fluss instead. But again, like, he charged Nirvana $100,000 because he's working with a major label, but like, he's working with these guys. He charges them $3,000. Like, they show up. He had just expanded the studio in his house at this point, so he's scaling here.
Yeah.
He's quoted in, this is 93 again, so right around that time, he's saying he's recording somewhere up to 100 records a year. I mean, that's
just
crazy.
to pay the bills.
That's crazy. Like, because
It's
he's
3
not
days
taking,
a record. Like, what are you doing?
yeah. And it's not, because he's not taking these huge paychecks with all this fine print, he's churning this stuff out because he's got the know-how to get it done quickly and well. Like, he's got this skill set that he can do.
He's approaching it like he's in the service industry or something. He has the approach of a plumber. He's like, I did the job's done.
Right.
I don't own any part of this house that I just worked on. I'm moving on to the next job as quickly as possible because I have bills to pay.
Well, I've just bought this brand new swanky Roto-Rooter that I'm going to be able to do all this other stuff with.
The equipment.
And I need to pay for the equipment. So he's like, I just bought all this very expensive analog equipment.
Yep.
He's not sparing any expense because that is the tools that he lives and dies by
to get the accurate sound, of course.
Right. And so he's gotta churn this stuff out. But again, you get into this weird thing where, they recorded those mixes, but then ultimately, like, some of the stuff was tweaked. It isn't exactly what was done there, but because he wasn't as ingrained there, it seems like it didn't cause the contention. That it did with Nirvana. Like, he agreed to be with Nirvana and he's like, but this is what we're going to make. Whereas with this one, he had said, like, I don't want to be named on this. My role on this isn't important. The band wrote the songs, they performed everything, so he calls it refracted light. He's just like, you guys are the stars here. You're the ones generating all of this. I'm just part of the equipment,
Yep. Exactly.
So, and actually, so Jawbreaker's in that scene. The crazy thing that happens next is, like, Jawbreaker's opening for Nirvana.
Yes.
They are framed as, like, they're going to be the breakout next generation, the next Green Day of that scene. And they get slapped for the next move that they make as selling out, and their fan base implodes. It's almost like the Albini mantra, like, they flew too close to the sun and kind of, or broke the code, I guess is the better way of saying it. Like, they signed to the major label and everybody walked away from it.
Yeah,
because everyone was getting burned by the sellout syndrome. So it's just interesting, like, that, the thing that Steve keeps talking about winds up being the undoing for Jawbreaker as they're about to hit their trajectory. So another one for me is a fair amount later, but it's the Things We Lost in the Fire. I'm not super familiar with Low, but I know this album a bit. Sonically, it's very different from some of the stuff that we're talking about here, right? Low is very quiet. Yeah. But it's a beautiful album. And they another band that had a vision and they brought it to Steve. Steve's not the guy who's trying to make music that is quietly representing what loud music is doing. Right. He is Mr. Abrasive in his own personal life, but then he's able to do this, like, he was able to take their vision and sculpt it. It's just so impressive that he can just kind of shift like that,
Yeah, and well, I mean, he did do the Slint record, which is not. They do have some loud, abrasive sections, but they're closer to Low than most of the other stuff that he was doing at the time. So there is that, and I love that record. Some of the favorites here for me, other than what we've already talked about, that first Breeders album, Pod. If I had to choose between that Breeders record or Last Splash, which everybody knows as their big breakout with Cannonball on it and everything.
Cannonball, yeah.
I would choose Pod. I just love how that record sounds. It's
okay.
It's got some amazing tracks. Of course, there's the Beatles cover on that, which I'm a sucker for. And I just love that record. I don't know too much about Steve's involvement in the recording of that record, other than, Kim, coming from the Pixies, was of course impressed with what Steve could do and asked him to produce the first Breeders record. And, you can hear the similarities just sonically and particularly in the drums. I think that's kind of his signature. And even Dave Grohl talks about feeling like one of his biggest life accomplishment. Oh, and I think he talks about this in that first Sonic Highways episode that we talked about. The Foo Fighters series where they go to different cities and record a new song in different cities.
Right.
He talks about how recording In Utero with Steve and getting that, he calls it the quote unquote Steve Albini sound with his drums, is like one of his biggest life accomplishments.
Really?
Yeah. And they just sound huge and accurate, and you can hear everything that the drummer is doing, but you can also at the same time hear just how massive it is, especially a drummer like Dave, who is just smashing the drums as hard as he possibly can. And it sounds incredible. So
I gotta watch Sonic Highways. I've never seen it. It seems so cool.
It's, in my personal opinion, it's kind of hit or miss. Some of the episodes are kind of like, all right. Like even the Austin episode, me being an Austinite, I'm kind of like, all right, like, come on, let's just hear the song. But that first Chicago episode, honestly, like, you want to learn a little bit more about Steve Albini. A huge segment of that episode is about him and his early life and the early punk Chicago scene.
Oh, man.
And, they interview him, and they use that interview quite a bit in that episode. So
weird, because he had nothing to do with that album, though.
Right. They just used his studio.
That's so weird.
Butch is still, because he produces the whole thing, but they rented out.
Butch Vig, who did Nevermind,
exactly,
produces the album that's recorded in Steve Albini's studio.
And I don't know if they have any kind of relationship, or if they hate each other, or they're indifferent or whatever. But they're not seen on camera together, at least,
right?
In the episode, as far as I remember. But they just rented out his studio, and there's parts where he's talking about some of the really interesting aspects of the studio, per Steve's design. For example, the separation of the floor from the wall, like they're not connected, to create more space where there wouldn't normally be, to allow the low frequencies to do what they need to do. It's just like crazy stuff weird. That even me with my like a literal education in music acoustics and sound engineering, I can't wrap my mind around. It's just beyond me.
Yeah, it's like those cherry notes that people taste in wine, where I'm like, I don't
taste like wine.
Maybe it's there, and I exactly. I am not able to figure it out.
Oaky nuttiness. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other one that I can speak to here, at least a little bit, is the Cloud Nothings record.
Yeah, same.
Okay, so we have some crossover here. So tell me about your.
Yeah, well, so I worked with Dylan a bunch on some stuff. He's he's so young when he started off, and he was doing this kind of cool like indie pop stuff. And I remember when this album came out, Attack on Memory.
Yeah, it was a change for them.
Yeah, like a lot of people were talking about it. It was like, oh my God, what is this? And then Dylan is kind of talking about how like this is what he wanted the band to be. Like this is the stuff. It kind of like Kurt. He's just like, this is the stuff that I like listening to.
Yeah,
I want to make the album that's similar to what I like. You know, he was bored with what he was doing before, and he really wanted to kind of break out of the routine of what he was being defined as. But again, like, he's a 20-year-old guy at this point, so like he's also pushing against, like, he's dealing with a lot of transitional times in his life just in general as this kind of celebrated like indie rock starlet, like in that time. But it's funny because he talks about, as I was digging in on this a little bit, he talks about the exact thing that is so Albini, where he's just like, he went in and Albini set it up and recorded it and left him alone. He didn't make any suggestions.
And played Scrabble on his phone, is how the story goes.
According to Dylan. Yeah. I mean, Albini says that he was just like reading stuff and like not interfering with the recording process because he was just going to let it be what it was.
Yeah.
And he said, like, look, he jumped in at times when it was something that didn't gel.
And he elaborates on this in another, I can't remember if it was an interview or it might have been like the Ask Me Anything that he did, but the Scrabble thing and the reading dry material thing is actually a technique to not mess with the sound too much.
To not have influence, right? Yeah.
It's not even so much influence, because he's still trying to just, either way, he's trying to make the band sound as accurately like the band as possible. But if you're just laser focused on the recording session, you can overcorrect and you can just, out of like tunnel vision, start fiddling with stuff that doesn't need to be fiddled with.
Yeah.
So the technique, or I mean, I guess you could call it a technique of keeping a very dry and uninteresting task in front of you, whether it's playing Scrabble or reading like technical manuals or parts catalogs and stuff like that. You're not so engrossed in what you're doing that you're no longer listening. But what you're doing is keeping enough of a focus off of it that you still hear if something is wrong. It's like, oh, that needs to be fixed, right? But you're not so honed in that you're over tweaking it and over producing with it and messing with stuff that doesn't actually need to be messed with.
Yeah.
And I can see that. I can somewhat identify with that thinking and the way that is. When I've created and made music in the past and during the mixing phase, you've listened to the song so many times that, you know, doing something dry to distract you from the sound in front of you is actually pretty helpful. And it's kind of ingenious.
Yeah.
So he, you know, it turned out to be this thing where like, oh, he did so little that he sat there on his phone playing Scrabble the whole time. But, you know, I think the way that record sounds speaks for itself, because it sounds like exactly the way it sounds like a live recording of the band almost. That's kind of his thing. The band sounds the way that they sound. His job is to capture it the way that they sound.
And the other thing that I'll just float, like, in line with what Dylan's saying here, there's all these other, because it hasn't stopped. Like, he's still doing this all the way through the pandemic. Like, Laura Jane Grace put out an album last year that he produced, that she went in and sat with him and recorded, and she comes out of it being like, she was like almost intimidated. Like, he kind of insists, there's different takes on this, so who knows what's actually being laid down, but he kind of insists on doing 2 takes and that's it. You know, like, it's like, if you don't get it in 2 takes, like, you're not going to get it, but also it loses the authenticity of it, I think.
Oh, definitely.
So she walks away from it being like, yeah, I really needed to get it done in those 2 takes because like I was like, don't know what was going to happen otherwise, you know?
Yeah.
But she was also like, but he was right. Like you walk away from it and you hear it and you're like, oh man, maybe if I had done one more take of that, and then you hear what he delivers and you're like, oh no, he was right. The second take, that's all I really needed.
Yes.
You know, I needed 2 takes and I'm done.
It's always the second take.
It's so crazy.
In my
so
experience,
crazy.
it's always the second take.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's worked with a ton of other artists. Just,
Yeah.
We mentioned Slint. He did an album with Jarvis Cocker, the lead singer of Pulp, Mogwai, the Jesus Lizard, Chevelle, Helmet. Worked with the Stooges, A Cheap Trick. He produced an album for Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. Like the Veruca Salt. The guy's pervasive, and we don't have enough time to talk about all of these amazing records that he's produced. But I just think that, and he's still alive, but his legacy is just so ever present, and it's there, and it's something that musicians specifically really appreciate. You know what I mean? Record executives hate him, but musicians that understand what he's doing, they appreciate somebody like him so much. Yeah. And I don't know that there's really anybody else like that. There's nobody doing what he does.
No, when we were talking about doing this episode, one of the things that made me kind of excited, because again, it is out of my wheelhouse, at least in my personal familiarity, is that it's so divergent from what you usually hear, especially more so now with producers. Producers are almost like co-writers. They're almost a part of the band.
Yep.
They have their fingerprints on things more and more by design, and this was such the antithesis of that. It's weird. There's 2 things as we kind of wrap, maybe talking about his ethos a little bit. Like, there's 2 things about him. There's that stand out to me. One that I appreciate a lot, but I can't wrap my head around, and that is his ability to hear the potential of music in a different way. So what I mean by that is, when I hear something quote unquote new, it shocks me, like when even though the Gaslight Anthem thing is very derivative of Bruce and the Replacements and a bunch of other things, like it felt new enough for me where I was like, oh my God, how did somebody make something new? Like
right.
My disposition is, my assumption is that at some point we're going to run out of songs, like
there's only so many combinations of notes, right?
Yeah. I'm like, eventually we're just going to run out of stuff. Like, I don't know how people keep coming up with new creative ways to make stuff. And Steve sees the exact opposite. He talks at one point, because he always gets asked about his minimalism, right? Like he strips things down, he mics it up with analog stuff, analog gear, and he gets it done. And they're like, how do you stay so dynamic with such a minimalist setup? And he looks at it and he's like, think of a chessboard. There's all these different pieces, but that's it. You just have those pieces. And you could look at that and be like, well, then there's not a whole lot of options there. But he says, like, it would require more time than the universe has existed to actually play every single game of chess that is possible.
That's true.
So he's like, there are so many things that just a small shift here or there can create this enormous number of outcomes. And it's kind of striking me, like, as I think about it and as I read through this, where I was like, it makes me see music a little differently. Because, again, I'm always anticipating, like, when I hear a song from a band I love, I'm like, well, that's probably going to be the last time that they make anything that I'm going to be that excited about, because, like, how are they ever going to do best that? How are they ever going to reinvent anything else? Yeah, exactly. But what I do get from him, and what I do really gel with is his aversion to maximalism, if you will. You know, like this industry is rife with people, both artists and then the latchers on, they have this ambition to like get a bigger house and get swankier things and just like a life of excess. And he is so against that. He's just like, I need what I need.
Yep.
I do what I do. I can do my job well. Leave me alone. Like
pretty much.
like I can do my thing. I like that resonates with me so much, where like in realizing that this person is such an important beacon in this industry, it makes me feel less alienated that there is somebody out there who feels these things and can act upon it and have this success and like
that's the big
persist.
Thing. Yeah, because I'm sure there are thousands and probably tens of thousands of working man's engineers out there that have these little hole in the wall studios that we've never heard of, that have a very similar ethos, probably inspired by him, but you know, have a similar outlook, and they just want to do what they do because they love doing it. And you know, we may never know who these people are, but somehow Steve, with his like punk rock working man's ethos, you know, he's not a household name necessarily, but music fans know the name. And he's made a mark for himself in the music world at large. I mean, even with just Surfer Rosa and In Utero right there, he's made his mark on an industry that he kind of hates. He just wants to play the music that he wants to play and record music the way that those artists want to put out their music.
Right. But he will never have to do anything that he doesn't want to do. And that is, that's enviable. Yeah.
It is. I agree. And that's it. I don't have anything else to say.
That's Steve Albini, you know?
That's wonderful. I love it. But yeah, you should listen to, okay. As long as you don't have your kids in the car, you should listen to Shellac.
I will. Well, so Shellac is like Big Black. Like it also is just very inappropriate.
It's not Big Black. It's not. Okay. It's like almost every song has the little E, the explicit lyrics warning on it. So it's not kid friendly, but it's not like excessively over the top, offensive on purpose like Big Black was. There's just, you know, it's really great music, and if you dig the guitar tone, then you're just gonna love it. The drums sound great. Some people are turned off by the guitar tone because it's a very, very I mean, we've used the word abrasive so many times. And I used the example of plugging the guitar into a microwave, but it's almost more like maybe a guitar plugged into a chainsaw or a belt sander or something.
Oh man.
It's just a really, really raw and abrasive guitar tone. But it works. It works really well for what they do. The drums and bass sound great. The rhythm section is nearly perfect. And then, you know, the front and center is Steve howling and, you know, singing songs about praying to God to kill somebody or whatever other crazy, you know, song concepts he comes up with. And it's great. I love it. It's music to be played very loudly, and it sounds fantastic.
I am looking right now because now I'm just interested. Like I'm going to go into this because, I mean, the way you've described it, I feel like you've expanded my mind a little bit. I'm seeing an album called Excellent Italian Greyhound from 2007. Do you know that one?
A little bit.
Okay.
You know, I cut my teeth on the earlier albums at Action Park and Terraform.
Okay. So there's a song on this called Genuine Lullabelle, and in the notes here it says that it features clips of Strong Bad from Homestar Runner reciting lines from the song, which sounds like now I'm just going to go listen to this immediately because I love Homestar Runner. And also I want to know the backstory to that, so I
don't know. Like that, it's funny because that's the album that I probably know the least about. Okay. I was blasting Dude Incredible today, and obviously listened to a ton of those first two albums. I listened to a little bit of 1,000 Hertz when it came out in 2000. That one was funny because I remember buying it at this small record shop, not the one that I worked at, but a different one. In Hyannis, Massachusetts. And, it was like this, it's designed to look like, a box that would contain like the reel to reel tape, for a recording console.
Yeah.
And, it even kind of opens the same way. It's not like a cut open sleeve on one side, like a normal,
it's like a case
record.
Kind of
no, it's just like a box almost.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. So I opened it, and then along with the vinyl record, there was a CD inside as well. It's the CD of the album. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh my God.
And now I have the CD too.
Cool.
So, that was a cool one. But it's like, yeah, that first song is kind of intense on that album. That's the one called, I think it's called Prayer to God. And it's literally the entire song is him praying and pleading for God to kill one of his enemies. It's just like, it gets very intense, but the music is fantastic. So
wow.
It's an adventure.
Also I saw that he won, his second Poker World Series recently. Like,
yep.
This guy.
And we didn't even really talk about that, did we? But
that's so weird.
That's another one of his pastimes. And he plays poker, very at a professional level. and he says himself that there have been some times where, having a good week playing poker is what paid the salaries of the people that work for him at Electric Audio.
Oh my God.
Because he doesn't take royalties.
Yeah. Wow. It's crazy to me. It makes sense, I guess, because he is so meticulous and detail oriented. He's got that mind of metal and wheels that
very meticulous.
I bet you he figures things out in poker that he's probably just so calculated and everything. It kind of makes sense. Yeah.
He's so stoic too. Like his never any expression on his face. You know what I mean? Just deadpan, especially in his later years. You might get a snide, like, Sid Vicious kind of look from him in the earlier years during the punk days. But just a stoic dude, cool guy, very upfront and to the point, respectable ethos, and just has such an incredible and inspiring method for recording albums. And I just love the way that his records sound, and there's really nothing like it.
Yeah.
But that's Steve Albini in a nutshell, or in an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah.
We had to talk about Coolio though. That was important. So this will be a little bit longer because of that. But but as usual, really enjoyed talking with you, Liam, about this topic. Glad you also got your mind expanded a little bit too. You'll definitely have to hook me up with some knowledge on Gaslight Anthem.
Yeah, do that
at some point for sure.
Yeah.
But thank you, listener, for listening to Retro Groove. We're part of the Retro Logic family of podcasts. You can find us on Discord on the Retro Logic server, and you can also find us on Twitter at RetroGroove_pod. We love talking to folks on Twitter. It's always a good time. Come to the Discord and have fun with us there, posting memes, talking about what you've been listening to and all that good stuff. We'd love to have you. But until next time, adios.
See ya.